Welcome to Joy in Our Town. I'm Coach D. Robinson, your host, and today I'm here at Morningstar Academy with Dr. Casey Shutt, the headmaster. Welcome, Dr. Shutt.
Thanks for having me.
Dr. Shutt, there's some startling statistics that I'd like to share with you today. For the last 7 years, 25 Davenport schools have remained in the in need of assistance list for reading and math. Now that's Iowa. In Moline, 5 of 12 elementary schools made the mark, and in Galesburg, the middle and elementary schools made the standards, but the high schools are still struggling. Now, some are saying that the return to classical education may be the solution. I'm saying maybe there's something wrong with our public education. What are the alternatives?
Classical education is an old model of education. It goes back thousands of years, all the way back to the Greeks and Romans. And it includes a very broad education that extends beyond like the ages for grades K through 12. But when we refer to classical education, we're referring to just the K through 12 grades, that age group. And for us, classical education, we follow what's called the trivium. The trivium is composed of 3 schools: the grammar, logic, and rhetoric school. And each of those schools corresponds to our elementary, middle, and high school. But during the grammar stage, elementary ages, students are incredibly capable of memorizing lots of information. And so we put all of their subjects through an emphasis on memorization. And then as students move into the middle school years, they tend to become a little bit more argumentative, and they challenge assumptions that maybe previously they just accepted. And so we want to tap into that tendency by teaching them how to argue well. They'll take a logic class. And also all of their subjects are filtered through an emphasis on clear thinking. And then as students move into the high school grades 9 through 12, they enter the rhetoric school. And there the emphasis is on clear and persuasive communication or expression. I mean, that's what, when students get into high school, that tends to be the preoccupation of how they're expressing themselves. And usually it's through things like their clothes and the music they listen to and the cars that they drive. We want them to learn how to express themselves substantially through both their oral and written communication. So there'll be a lot of classroom discussion. They will present in class regularly. They'll do a lot of writing in their classes. And the goal by the end of this K through 12 experience is that they have received skills that will help them think clearly and communicate those thoughts persuasively. And that skill set will serve them well in whatever it is that they end up doing. Some other pieces of this classical model are that we appreciate the past, and so we like to read old things. Also, our curriculum, we try to keep it very integrated. So in history, if they're learning about ancient Egypt, we'd like for them in their literature class to be reading literature coming out of the ancient world. And in art class, ideally they would be working on maybe a hieroglyphic art project, so that you can, as much as you can, reinforce the material with the different subjects that they're studying. And then a final component of it is that we're really interested in raising up virtuous people. We're not just simply interested in filling their minds with information, but we want to transform individuals.
Now, with the failure of the public schools, it's kind of sending people scampering a little bit, parents and families. They're looking for alternatives in education. How might a classical education keep their kids from falling behind?
We try to challenge them at every step of the way. And one of the things we can benefit from is we have parents that are very much involved in the education of their children. And the parental involvement really propels, I think, our training of these students. So I think that's a big advantage. Another thing too, I'd like to know what the parents mean by falling behind, because in some ways, some of the things that we do may appear as falling behind or maybe a waste. I mean, for example, we have our students learn Latin, and some people may say, well, that's a dead language. Surely there's more important things that you could be teaching than Latin. But we believe that some of these things are very important, maybe not in the immediate, but long term they're important. The movie Karate Kid, I don't know if you've seen it.
Yes.
Daniel moves to this California town, starts getting bullied, and he meets Mr. Miyagi, who trains him. And in the training to help deal with these bullies that he has. And the training at first seems very odd and out of place. He's waxing on, waxing off cars, he's painting, and you're wondering, is he going to get the proper training that he needs? But once the training moves along and you see the beginning to end process, all of a sudden the car washing makes sense. In some ways, that's kind of, the classical model has aspects like that. Mm-hmm. Things that may not seem to make sense, when they get to the end of their time here, all of a sudden you begin to see the reasoning behind some of those things.
When some people hear the word classical, they're thinking that classical model sounds kind of old. Do you think that this Back to the Future model is relevant today?
The workplace, thanks in large part to technology, is constantly evolving. And so the kinds of people that we need working are people capable of learning new things. Mm-hmm. And that's our primary objective, is to teach students that have a love and an ability to learn new things. A second thing too is that a lot of the economic crisis of 2008, the Enron scandal a few years earlier, some of these corporate problems, a lot of them are rooted in unethical business practices. And so for us to try to be raising up virtuous citizens, I think we're preparing them well for the kind of training the kind of workers that we need in the economy.
Are there some major differences between what your school is about and public education?
One difference, I think, is that we are explicitly grounded in a faith. We are a Christian school, and so that informs all of what we do here. And I would say in the public school setting, there may be some faith assumptions that are operating, but it's not as explicit.
In our era, information is so readily available to all of us. It certainly is exponential. How can students learn the necessary critical thinking skills to decipher valuable and reliable knowledge from, say, trivial information?
Once students get to that logic stage, the middle school years, the emphasis really shifts into helping them decipher important from unimportant or trivial information. Mm-hmm. And so we do that through a lot of the processes we do. Even learning Latin enhances a student's analytical skills to have to learn the grammar of Latin. But especially as they get into the rhetoric stage, a lot of our classes we try to teach Socratically, which is a way of teaching by asking questions and having students discuss with one another and try to move the lesson along through the asking of questions. And that will enhance a student's critical thinking skills. Now,
some people may want to argue with that theory. They may say that the emphasis on the classic is Eurocentric. Is classical education accepting the multiple cultures in the worldview?
We emphasize, as a classical school, Western civilization, which is a lot of European history and culture and literature. And that historically has been the emphasis in public schools as well. But I think in recent years there's been a shift away from that because of the sense that maybe that was a little too Eurocentric. But our belief is Western civilization has shaped us here in America. And if we want to understand ourselves, we have to have an understanding of Western civilization. And then also, Western civilization has left its footprint all over the globe. And so for us to understand our world better, an understanding of Western civilization is really helpful. But we also appreciate other worldviews, and we want to understand them and study them. We have a worldview class that our students take in the rhetoric school, and they will study a number of worldviews. And then two, we put an emphasis on primary sources. I just ran into a student upstairs that was reading the Pilgrim's Progress. It was a source written by a Puritan, John Bunyan. And primary sources are sources written by a person during the time period. So in order to read, they're difficult to read, because the language is different, the culture is different. So that requires empathy and understanding. I think just reading those primary sources helps prepare students to engage a culturally pluralistic setting.
Are there some things that maybe a parent could evaluate or think about when it comes to this classical education that maybe is set for their family and their children?
Yeah, I think they definitely should. You know, I have 2 young children, and so a lot of our peers are parents, and we're talking, you know, at various spots about parenting. And I hear a lot of parents talking about the food that they're buying their children. Is it organic, and how is it produced? I hear a lot of parents talking about toys that they're buying, and are they safe for their children? I don't hear as much talk about education. And I see that as being just as, if not more important than some of those other things. So I think maybe some questions that parents can ask would include, what do they want to see the education their children receive produce? What kind of children do they want what do they want their children to become as a result of the education that they receive? And then another important question is, how should the faith component work with their education? And then finally, a third question is that they should consider kind of the culture of the school and how that's going to affect the student, because, you know, education is more than simply what takes place in the classroom and what's read in a textbook. There's a cultural aspect, and it's harder to pinpoint. It's just kind of in the air. But are they placing their students in a culture that's going to form their student in a way that they'd like them to be formed?
In today's world, there's financial obligations, there's barriers, there's laws, bylaws. There are many reasons why a parent may not be able to change the schooling of their individual. So what would you say to that one? How can they enrich their child using classical education principles?
I think there's a lot of ways they can do it. There's a book by Susan Wise Bauer called The Well-Trained Mind, and it is a extremely helpful guide. The intent of the book is to help families that want to homeschool their children in a classical model. But parents, if they send their kids to the public school, for example, and they want to implement some classical principles, that book would be an extremely practical and helpful guide. I think too, just setting a tone at home of learning. Are parents reading to their children? Do parents model an appreciation for learning? Having discussions with their students about important topics. All those things I think would really help education at home.
You've given us a lot of information. Maybe there's 2 or 3 nuggets that you could give to the audience as a recap of today's conversation.
Yeah, I think the education of their children or child is an extremely important thing. And the 18 years or so that parents have with their children is a largely very formative time. And so it behooves parents to really pay close attention to the education that they're offering their children.
And how might a parent be able to learn more about classical education and Morningstar Academy?
Well, at Morningstar we have tours twice a month where we give a tour of the school and we explain the model, and parents are able to see the building and see classrooms. We have those twice a month. They can visit our website, www.morningstaracademy.org, to find out the times of those tours. And we also have information available on the website.
Well, Dr. Shutt, I certainly have been enlightened on classical education, and I know our audiences have been as well. Thank you so much for being a part of Joy in Our Town. I learned a lot about classical education, and I'm sure our audiences did as well.
Thanks for having me.
You're watching TBN, part of the Trinity Broadcasting family of networks.
Welcome back to Joy in Our Town. I'm Coach D. Robinson, your host, and we're back again with Dr. Casey Shutt, the headmaster here at Morningstar Academy. Welcome back, Dr.
Thanks.
Shutt. A study by the Pew researchers indicates that nearly 90% of teachers are believing that digital technology is creating an easily distracted generation with a short attention span. I'm saying that could be a problem. Are those numbers staggering to you?
It is surprising to me, and here's what's surprising about it, because I see at the same time a trend in schools wanting to incorporate more digital technology. And if 90% of teachers believe that creates a short attention span, I'm wondering why that's happening. I actually agree with those 90% of teachers that so many of these technologies contribute to a short attention span and distraction. You know, if you think about your typical internet experience, it's a very disjointed experience. You get online to maybe pay an electric bill, and the next thing you know, you're chatting with a friend in China, and then you're reading up on humpback whales, and it's very disjointed.
Earlier we talked about classical education. Now in that same study, over 60% of teachers were saying that technology has hampered students' writing, their creative thinking, their social skills. I think that's kind of staggering, but what are some of the areas that classical education might address with those skills?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, especially on the critical thinking, that's one of our big pushes in our curriculum, is to cultivate that. And so that's why some of the things that I mentioned earlier apply on the computer front. And that's why when we think about using technology, we really try to be selective and measured in how we use it.
Now, classical education is important, but kind of give me what Morningstar Academy might do with technology in the classroom, and then contrast it to the benefits or maybe not having it in the classroom.
Well, the internet is a powerful tool, and I don't see it going away anytime soon. So in order for students to be prepared for life in the 21st century, they've got to have a familiarity with the internet. And so we want them to be familiar with it. We want them to be able to use it as a research tool, because there's so much to access there. And we want them to learn how to use it properly. Our students from 5th through 12th grade have email accounts that we want them to use, and we communicate with them that way. But the internet also poses some challenges. Like I said, the disjointed nature of it. There's so much available on it. Students, my experience is that I tend towards the more entertaining parts of it, as opposed to maybe the more important, substantial material that's available online. So that's a concern. I mean, one way to look at it is that the positive of the internet is that everyone has a voice. The downside is that everyone has a voice. So you have to be able to filter and sift through what's of value and what isn't as valuable, and that can be a challenge.
I'm not sure if you were aware of or listened to the news lately about the school, Waldorf School of the Peninsula. There's a very, very interesting concept going on there. While the parents of the students are highly technology skilled, the students are attending schools, their children attending the schools that is low technology, or basically no technology. Why would someone do that?
Yeah, I think it's really telling. You know, the school's located in Silicon Valley, and so why are these high-tech parents working, you know, at the cutting edge of technology, wanting to say, yeah, that's it? To me, it's telling. I think they understand the power of these tools, but also the importance of introducing students to some other things before they jump in to the technology. You could actually think of it like this. When a baby before they learn to walk, they learn to crawl. Now, crawling is not very efficient. It's not very quick. But actually, there's some very important developmental things happening as that baby's crawling around. Neurological connections are being made in the brain. And if a baby goes from just sitting to walking, they miss out on some of that development. I think it's kind of the same way with technology. It's important for students that we teach them developmentally how to do some things without some of these computer technologies, and then at a later point introduce these computer technologies.
Let's talk about socialization. Do you think maybe there are some ill effects of maybe being plugged in too much to maybe technology and the internet?
I think it can be somewhat damaging. I mean, we've all had friends or family, you know, maybe it was a teenager that was constantly plugged in. They're always there, but they're actually never really there. And I think that poses problems. And you also have to think about not only that they're maybe not present with you, even though they are physically there, but what's the nature of their relationships with others online? Chances are they may be on Facebook, or they may be engaging in interactions with others. But if you think about social media, it's us presenting the best version of ourselves, and it's us interacting with others on our own terms. And that's not how true friendship is. I mean, friendship involves seeing kind of the warts and all of one another and being able to, serve our friend. And I think social media kind of can present an illusion of fellowship and community, and not actually give you the heart of it.
Let's talk a little bit, Dr. Shutt, about integrity. Now, we know that the internet and technology can offer us tons of information, maybe to the extent that there could be some plagiarism going on. How do you weigh in on that? How do you prevent that?
Yeah, I think it is a challenge. Plagiarism in particular being the big one. And I think one thing about the internet is that it makes it easy maybe for students to be involved in plagiarism, but it also is easy. The flip side is that it's easy to catch them. I taught in the college setting a while back, and I can remember one paper was turned into me. The first paragraph was poorly written. Second paragraph was excellent. I thought this can't be from the same student. So I just Googled a little excerpt from that second paragraph, and sure enough, a web page popped up with the whole thing word for word that they had copied. So it was easy to track down. But I think it goes back to, our educational goals is raising up virtuous people, and so our helping students deal with integrity online is just dovetails with that goal of cultivating virtuous people.
You said earlier the internet is going to always be around and the cloud. Do you think maybe we're putting our students at a disadvantage in the future if we don't offer them all the technology that's out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main thing to bear in mind is what are these computer technologies and other technologies good for? And they're very powerful tools that are excellent at handling information, processing it, relaying it, locating it. They're very good at word processing, at helping us word process. They're very good at quick and efficient communication. So insofar as our goals line up with those things, then we'll use computer technology. But computer technologies and other technologies aren't as good at cultivating habits of thoughtful reflection. Typical internet experience is like, it's like trying to think in the midst of being online is like trying to meditate in the midst of a carnival. It's very difficult. Yeah. They aren't as good at socializing as we indicated earlier. And so there's computer technologies they're not good at evaluating truth, goodness, and beauty. So they could hamper us in certain areas. I think the main question is to figure out what our goals are as we educate our students and how computers line up with those goals. And another thing to add is that as students move further along in their education, as they graduate and maybe go to college or do some kind of vocational training, that's really where they begin to learn the technical expertise of their particular area. And what we're providing is a more foundational, clear thinking, ability to communicate persuasively, and those apply to any given field.
And how do you teach kids to critically think and evaluate all this material that's out there that's available to them?
Yeah, well, I think it takes a lot of work, and I think once again the classical model really imparts the tools to be able to do that. The teaching Socratically, having the discussion and having students on the spot filter comments of other students and then bounce back with their own rebuttal or challenges or maybe affirmations. I mean, that entire conversation is a great help in teaching students how to filter things.
How receptive are the students here at Morningstar to a more traditional learning style?
As far as I can tell, I think they are receptive. I mean, I'm sure that there's some students that would like to see more technology being used, but I think for most students, it's when they're at home. Really, everywhere we go, we're surrounded by these technologies. It's sort of a breath of fresh air to be in a hard, tangible book, and be working in a text or working face to face with others. I would see that as a breath of fresh air.
Growing up in my generation, I know that computers are not the greatest thing that we can learn about so readily. So what kind of things maybe a parent can be aware of when it's related to technology?
Yeah, I think it's important for parents to remember that technology, like any tool, forms us. Peter Berger is a sociologist, and he says that humans make tools, and then they begin to use these tools, and the tools in turn make them. There's a phrase that to a man with a hammer, everything becomes a nail. And maybe a personal example will help. When TiVo first came out, we got it, and we used it, and we loved it. And I found myself, after using it for some time, actually wanting to rewind what I was seeing going on around me. The tool was actually shaping how I saw the world. And I just wanting to rewind something that my daughter just did right in front of me. So that's an example of how these tools form us. And so it's important for parents to be thoughtful in considering how iPads, iPhones, and these other technologies shape their children.
What is some wisdom maybe that you could give to the audience to take away from this conversation today that might help them when they're thinking about technology?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is no replacing the written word. The things that happen when we read text, whether it's online or in a book, our brains are really working hard. And I think it's important for parents to really stress text, word-based communication to their children. Because if students are able to read well, that's going to do great things for their minds, for their brains. And so much of these digital and electronic technologies have a preference towards image-based communication. There's nothing wrong with it, but we don't want to lose the text.
And if someone wanted to get a hold of Morningstar and learn more about technology, how can they do that?
Well, a great starting point is our website, www.morningstaracademy.org. You'll also find contact information on the website, and folks are welcome to contact us with any questions that they might have.
Dr. Shutt, thank you and Morningstar Academy for enlightening us today on technology in the classroom. And thank you also for being a part of Joy in Our Town.
Thanks for having me.
It was my pleasure.
This program has been sponsored by the Trinity Broadcasting Network and made possible by your telethon dollars. Your continual support can keep Joy in Our Town brought to your home every day. So write Joy in Our Town, P.O. Box A, Santa Ana, California, 92711.
You're watching TBN, part of the Trinity Broadcasting family of networks.